I used to love everything that was horror. From supernatural to psychological, I loved it all equally and filled my apartment with movies, posters, and even some props I could get my hands on. Horror was my escape from the mundane existence that had become my life. At 26, with a BA in business management, I found myself working in a cubicle farm for an insurance company who shall remain anonymous. And while the pay was decent, I was getting older every day with nothing real to show for it. So coming home and watching horror movies or playing horror games or even listening to creepy podcasts was my escape from reality. This escape came to an end a few months ago. All my memorabilia is gone, all my posters taken down, and my prized movie collection sold. You look at it differently when it happens to you. When I used to think about haunted buildings, a 15-story, 30-year-old office building in the middle of downtown never even registered in my mind. And that's why I'd worked late without complaint many times. However, the night I'm writing about was unique for me. I was alone. Now, I wasn't alone in the building, as there was a crew of custodians there as well, but I work on the 11th floor, and there are only 5 custodians, so you do the math on how much time I spent by myself. I think it was around 10 p.m. when I first noticed it. I had just finished up a large number of claims and was about to leave my cubicle to get a cup of water when I noticed something after looking up from my computer screen with a stretch. About 12 feet away from me, above a table where we keep hole punchers and baskets for incoming and outgoing paperwork, the ceiling tile was out of place. While most of it was still there, it had been moved to allow maybe a 4 or 5 inch gap in the corner closest to me. I think my eyes latched onto it because it seemed so out of place with the rest of the symmetrical ceiling, but I dismissed it, inwardly convincing myself that it had always been like that. After all, how many times had I really looked up at the ceiling for any extended period of time? Probably never. I left my cubicle and made my way to the water cooler. I still had some work left to do, but it wasn't all that much, so I took my time walking through the floor. Normally it was so busy and noisy during the day, and now I was there by myself. There seemed to be a calm, serene aura that hovered over the space. Add that with a decent view of the rest of the city all lit up outside the windows, and I didn't really mind being here at night. The only things that were bummers was an infestation of flies that had appeared on my floor only about a week prior, along with a really bad smell. But those were just little things, and the different fly traps management had set up, along with a multitude of air fresheners, seemed to be working. I reached the water cooler, got a cup, and took a long drink. I stood by it for a few minutes, just gathering my thoughts and giving my hands and fingers a little break before I decided to head back to my cubicle and finish up for the night. I was about to step back into my workspace when a sound caught my ear. It was something scraping against something, but I couldn't tell what. Looking around for a moment, it finally struck me that the sound was coming from above me. I looked up just as the sound stopped. Now, as I previously told you, I love horror. I know all the tropes and cliches, and I'm no ghost hunter. If something suspicious or spooky were to happen around me, I would get the hell out of wherever I was in a heartbeat. But this wasn't a horror movie. There was no slow build-up where small, weird things happen and I ignored them until it was too late. I hadn't gotten any strange premonitions or spine-chilling feelings that I rationalized away stupidly. Hell, I hadn't even heard any rumors about this building being haunted or having a dark past or anything. Everything just happened, right then and there, like a tidal wave of terror crashing into me. The gap made by the moved ceiling tile was now much bigger, at least 1.5 or 2 feet open. Before I could even think about why or how the gap had suddenly gotten bigger, slowly, a gray hand began to appear from the darkness. My blood froze and I stood there in absolute shock and terror as more of the hand emerged, becoming a gray arm covered in dry blood that hung limply from the ceiling. Then, part of her head appeared. Birthed from the darkness of the gap, long, dirty blonde hair stained black with dried blood, followed shortly by a gray-skinned forehead adorned with a long, nasty gash that seemed to be the origin of all the blood that was covering her hair. Then her eyes were brought into the light. It was the most horrible thing I'd ever seen in my life. Milky white orbs with large blue irises stared back at me, standing there slack-jawed at the terror unfolding before my eyes. All of a sudden, the instinct to run came screaming into my brain, and I followed its orders without hesitation. It didn't matter, the only things I had on me were my keys, wallet, and cell phone. I didn't care. Luckily for me, there was an emergency exit stairwell only about 30 feet from my cubicle, and in the opposite direction of the thing coming out of the ceiling. I made it to the door in maybe 4 seconds and pulled it open so fast I almost hit myself in the face with it. As I entered the doorway, I looked behind me for just a moment and froze up again. She was halfway out of the ceiling now, hanging upside down. Arms and hair hung limply past her head, and I could see the flowery shirt she was wearing was also caked in dried blood. Her eyes were still staring at me, but her lack of movement made me pause. The rational part of my brain began to kick in as I put some distance between her, and I was on the threshold of escape. Yes, this was freaky as hell and shouldn't be happening, but look at her. She's a dead body slowly being pulled from the ceiling by gravity. It was good to get away from her as not to contaminate a potential crime scene. Instead of running down the stairs, I should get out my cell phone and call the police. Then she opened her mouth, jaw moving upwards against gravity, and let out a loose, blood-curdling scream that pierced my ears like knives and caused my brain to panic instantly. She was no dead body, and that thought repeated itself in my mind over and over as I flew down the 11 flights of stairs, practically jumping down them without fear of injury. I just knew I had to get out of that building immediately, and adrenaline was helping me complete that task. I reached the ground floor and burst into the lobby. One of the custodians who was mopping the floor jumped in surprise at my sudden entrance. Having worked late before, I'd become friendly with all of them, but as he tried to greet me and ask what was wrong, I simply ignored him and ran for the front doors. I think he tried to shout out a warning, but with that terrifying scream still echoing in my mind, I wasn't listening. I should have, because only a few feet from the large glass doors, my foot slipped on the wet marble tiles and I went full speed head first, crashing into the massive locked doors, giving myself one hell of a concussion. My memory comes back to me hours later. I woke up from my concussion in a hospital room. My head ached something fierce and I had a large bandage around it. I was told by a nurse shortly thereafter that I did have a massive cut on my head that had a few stitches, but the good news was that I managed to avoid a skull fracture or any other type of brain damage. Before I could allow the good news to sink in, a police officer came into the room with updates and questions for me. I was a bit confused, so he filled me in on what I didn't remember due to my head injury. The custodian, seeing me crash into the door and start bleeding all over the place, of course called 911. The reason the cops also arrived on the scene besides the ambulance was because in my incoherent state, I was still trying to get out of the building, screaming over and over as much as I could scream with a head wound about a dead girl in the ceiling. As it turns out, I ended up solving a missing persons case, as well as finding the source of my floor's fly problem. Unable to get where exactly I saw this dead girl from the ceiling out of my concussed mind, the 4 officers who'd shown up did a broad sweep of my floor's building. They found her body on a homemade sort of hammock. She obviously would have been too heavy for the ceiling tiles to support her weight, so whoever had put her up there created a little suspension system to keep her over the tiles. Now in a better state of mind, I told the officer everything that had happened to me. He took everything that I said seriously, except for the dead girl screaming. He didn't accuse me of making it up or anything, just stating that he thought it might have been an auditory hallucination from my brain being in shock, mixed with my love of horror. The idea being that a dead girl screaming in a situation like that would happen in a horror movie, and since it pretty much had happened to me, my brain jumped the gun and made me think she started screaming. Later on, I found out that this woman was the missing wife of one of the custodians, and he was arrested for her murder. This explained not only how she had gotten up there without anyone noticing, but why the police didn't see the body hanging from the ceiling like I'd seen. The custodian snuck her body in around 10 days ago, and while the other four were cleaning different floors, he contracted this suspension system for her body and left her there. He also must have discovered her body hanging there out of the ceiling and put her back and closed the ceiling tile before the cops got there. This all makes sense, and months later I wish I could forget about it, but even believing the cop's statement about that scream being all in my head, there's still two things that keep me up at night. I'm staring down into my pillow as I can't make myself look up at the ceiling. Of these two things, I have no clue which is worse and disturbs me more. The fact that her body was found over 70 feet away from where she came through the ceiling with no signs of recent movements, or the fact that something would have to lift the ceiling tile from within the ceiling in order to move it like it had that night. Thank God I work from home now.